And I will give you the power tool today, and you will ask your government, why could the people of Nazi Germany have certain things which we don't have today anymore today? Why we are money slaves today? And I'll give you only one example why we are money slaves today in the Western world. If you purchase a house today, one generation or two generations has to pay back to the big bankers. There's high interest rates. In Nazi Germany, under Hitler, young couples got a free interest loan and could purchase a house. With the first child, a quarter of that loan was wiped off. Second child, another quarter. Fourth child, the loan was wiped off. People were free. When I was still living in Germany, we had 4 children at home. My mother used to say, look, there's a coming of your young brother. Under Hitler we would be debt-free. But under this system we still have to pay. We have to pay interest. And other things are in this power tool I give you today. If somebody is interested, you can have it. And you will ask your government, why did Australians die in the Second World War when Germany could have this already? Why we had to die? Why we have to go probably again for a Third World War? What is wrong? We want to go into investigation into that whole thing. And I tell you what, 10 years ago, I made David Brockschmidt in Adelaide. Many of you will not know who David Brockschmidt is. But everybody of you knows who is Oskar Schindler. Oskar Schindler was the man. Steven Spielberg has made the big movie out, Schindler's List. And David Brockschmidt's father, Heinrich, was operating a truck company. He supplied Oskar Schindler with the trucks. Otherwise, Oskar never had made it to get his shoes into safety. Now, the Brockschmidt family is honored. And even Dave risked his life in the Six-Day War for Israel. He was loaned by the war guild, the Germans have usually. But I'm telling you one thing, he told me it's not worth to go for them. And he became a revisionist, and he changed his whole mind in that whole thing. But if you like, you get the power tool, and you put the Australian government under notice to have that, what at least the German people had in World War, under the Third Reich.
Thank you very much indeed, Harry. I think this raises the issue as to whether or not we should have the right to speak. Because in many places in Australia, you would not be allowed to stand up and talk about such an issue. And why is that? Well, for a start, it's only because we have allowed it. Nothing in our society would happen unless we allowed it. When our military was sent over to Iraq to help kill Iraqis, it was only because we allowed it. And boy, was there ever an issue where we showed we didn't want to do that, but we didn't follow on. When they said, we're not going to take any notice of what you want, no matter the hundreds of thousands out on the streets throughout Australia, we said, oh, all right. So we need to be a little bit more certain in what we want and to get that across to our public servants. But there are many issues that cannot be discussed. That's one of the major ones. And it is interesting when you see, in many cases in Europe, hundreds and hundreds of people incarcerated, put in jail, through bringing up issues like that. I think it's time we made sure it certainly didn't happen in Australia. That's one of the beauties of a forum such as the Brisbane Forum and the Inverell Forum. We don't censor what people say. You don't have to agree with anything someone says, but it is so valuable in our society. And this isn't a comment on the last chat. It's so valuable for people to have an opportunity to voice their issues. Because when you don't do that, that builds up into serious problems in a society. And the very reason that people would be silenced, or try to be silenced, suggests that there are problems in our society that need to be handled. Now, our next short-term speaker is Colleen Pepperell. Would you come up, please, Colleen? Colleen's talk is about whales. Not the bank of, but the other type. Thank you very much indeed, Colleen. Away you go.
I have not studied whales, but I'll tell you what I found out through my family. When I was 7, second cousin Ned came to visit, and he had inherited many shares in the whaling business. And we were all excited about this, and we asked him about it. He said, "Oh, well, I don't have those shares anymore." We said, "Why not?" He said, "Oh, I got rid of them." They asked him to go out with a boat while they were whaling, and he said, "It is terrible." He said, they don't kill them, they cut them up. He said, "These whales are mammals. If the mother's got a cub with her, they cut it up." And she cries. She cries tears. Sorry. I heard on radio recently in Argentina, at the bottom of Argentina, there was a big whale floundering out there and it was dying. So some fishermen went out and they found it had a harpoon stuck in it. It was an old harpoon, and one of the fishermen says, because we've got one of those at home, it's been in the family for several hundred years, it was faulty. So they abandoned using it about 205 years ago. He said that whale's got to be about 205 years old. But the other thing is, this whale is over 200 feet long. Should we be killing them? I don't think so. What do you think? Okay. Thank you.
Debating. And do we have debating in our society anymore? No. You get an occasional funny one on the television, but the topics aren't worthwhile, they're just meant to be humorous. But I think it would be a marvellous idea if we brought debate back in our society, in halls and so on, in our communities. Also, in the middle of our local newspapers. I think that the middle page each week should be a topic for and against. And the for case, let's say 1,000 words or 1,500 words, and against, the cases are swapped before printing, and the other side can comment on it for another 500 words, and the lot is printed. Who would like to see that on issues? Okay. Well, you can. How? Well, right, that's true, but you can also cycle down there, walk or whatever, however you get down there, and go and see them, right? They could well pick up on that. I think many newspapers in Australia, particularly the ones that aren't controlled. And when we hear issues about sewage and whatever, we want both sides. It's no good. One side might convince you, but we want to hear the both. Okay, so Alan Skyling is now going to talk about an alternative way of funding the Crown's purposes. Thank you very much indeed. Alan, let's welcome Alan.
Well, thank you. I am prompted to make make this contribution by both of the previous speakers. This matter of taxation is something which has interested me, like everybody else, for quite a long time, and indeed for the last 2.5 decades. I've had a running battle with that most worthy of all adversaries of the Commissioner of Taxation about how I'm going to pay his claims against me lawfully. Now, I pose it in that way to bring in that there are actually two facets to this problem. There is the claim to make one's contribution to keep society running, generally known as taxation. But the other side of the argument is how you pay that. Now, it's this latter side which nobody ever gives any attention to, yet it is critical to the whole argument. Now, I said that my basis for saying this was an observation that was made in a marvellous little text that I got about 25 years ago by one Sir Ivor Jennings, very eminent British QC, whose text was entitled Magna Carta and its influence in the world today. Now, in the course of this book, it was only about 30 pages. What he showed was how from three provisions in Magna Carta, the entire parliamentary system, as we now know it, emerged from two of those provisions, and the third one, the entire judicial system, as we now know it, emerged. Now, on the parliamentary system, the comments were that scutage and aid shall not be levied in our kingdom except by common consent. And then they went on to say how that consent would be got, i.e. word was put out on a round of 3 times, and then after that they had their meeting wherein things were decided and the show moved on. On the judicial system, the court shall not follow the king around. Now, it was a sequel to this, that the courts became established at Westminster Hall, and the whole practice we have, as we now know it, of recording proceedings were all evolved. Now, the relevance of all that to the present effort is that on the matter of taxation, going from this scutage and aid, there was a point that he made there over about 3 sentences. Taxation was of great interest to the parliaments in the 14th and 15th century. Although Magna Carta, although Chapter 29 of Magna Carta protected property rights, this was of very little of value if the king could impose heavy and arbitrary taxation. And then his punchline. Though it was and still is the law that a tax on property is not a diminution of property rights, this is a very legalistic interpretation, because in fact tax must be met out of property, and for similar reasons fines aren't made excessive. So doing a double take on that, what's he saying there? Tax is illegal? Well, if that's so, then how the hell do you fund the Crown's purposes? Because that's what we're told taxation is all about. Right, okay, now that was the order of the day in the 14th and 15th century. Okay, now in the late 1600s, there was a marvellous technological development happened in respect of money. And this is where this comes into it. Because prior to that, the only money which was proper money was the king's money, coin. And indeed, that's still the law in this land to this day. But there were some curious things happened because at the end of the reign of the Stuarts, the fact that it had been brewing right through their period, there was a general problem as how to fund the Crown's purposes, as I put it. Now, what happened was the technological advance which occurred was the creation of paper money, if you like. And it sort of got put into circulation, but because of the ways that was done, there's been a fraud in the system for 300 years. And that's the bit which has interested me, how to deal with that, and if you fix that up, where could we go from there? Now, again, the punchline of it had to do with the founding of the Bank of England in 1694. And the point about that was there was 2 things about it. First of all, it was not envisaged that it would become a central bank, but the second one was it had been the intention of the promoters of the bank to use notes from the start, but for fear of rejection in Parliament, this was never sort of brought to the fore in the enabling act which got it underway, namely the Ways and Means Act of 1694. Now, I've had a read of that act, and there are copies. I've got mine out of the University Library, and it's a very interesting read. What actually happens? They started off about taxation, and then they sort of drifted in on the point that. Was to bring in this notion of paper money. Now, the punchline of it all was that there was a loan was granted for 1.2 million quid, and a quid would have been a quid in those days. It was secured against ships, tonnage and liquor, and a management fee of about $8,000, I think it was. Now, there was a very specific effort which allowed this to happen. But there was a point was made in this text where I got onto this, that it was whether it was intended that this constraint would preclude further issue was never made clear. But what in fact happened was that they issued what they call unsealed bills, as opposed to the sealed bill of unlimited value, and that's the basis of our banknotes to this day. Now, the fact is, the whole thing is based on a con. And the point of it all is that and this is what I've been trying to sort out with the courts. But to say the fight started 25 years ago and it is still going. And I'm hoping to get some resolution soon, but then that may not yet happen. But the point of it is, if you really want to stir the place up, was mentioned previously, in respect to getting some action, any Crown establishment or any arm of government, if you like, that's in here for money, ask them, okay, how am I going to pay your claim lawfully? Because in terms of the Critical Act, the Currency Act, which is legal tender, that's a form of payment which cannot be refused when it's tendered for the discharge of obligations by monetary means, is gold and silver coin.
Excellent.
But we don't have any.
Thank you very much indeed. Nick Main. What's happening in Australia? Come on up, and what can we do about it? Let's welcome Nick Main. Just back a bit from the mic, please.
Dennis said a while ago that we can say what we like in this country. Well, this is all okay for now, but it's going to happen. We're behind other countries. We usually are in most things. It will happen here because since the late 1960s, when they started to sneak a few racial aliens into the country and saying that that's all that's going to happen, it's now progressed to where we get bringing people in who are openly saying they're opposed to us and they're going to change our way of life. Now, since that time, in the late 60s, there's been small groups building up here, there and everywhere, but none of them were ever getting together. And this is why it's going to happen here, because you don't get together. You're going to leave here today individually, and that'll be it. But there should be delegates from all these groups get together and form some sort of cooperation, or preferably one group. Now, what is happening overseas and will happen here, or if you go out in the western suburbs, Sydney and some other places, it's bad enough there already. But in Europe, now the second largest political party in Denmark, for instance, is an Islamic party. A couple of years ago, I was right up the very top of Norway. And coming back down, before I got to the Arctic Circle, on the way down, I saw a demonstration going down the street with some poor little kids who know what it was all about, little fair-haired kids in a band. Behind them were these, they were Negroes, they weren't the Muslims, they were Negroes. And they had this banner, March Against Racism. Now they're all over Europe. In England, officially recognised now by the government is Sharia law, which is they want to bring in here too. Poised to come into the European Union is Turkey. Turkey's got about, I think it's either 91 or 97 million people. Now, it's from there mostly that they've got into Germany and all these other places, the Muslims from there. But if they allow Turkey to come in, you can say goodbye to your white race in Europe. But unless you get together here and do something together, you're going to be in the same position. England's got a bit of a chance because some time back some groups got together. They first formed the National Front and then there was a split and they got now the National Party, British National Party. They've got 100 people in councils already and they're beating the Labor Party in many areas. They could very well get into government, but that's because they got together. And I urge you people to talk amongst your groups and get in touch with each other, send delegates to a meeting together and see what you can do. Thank you.
Let's welcome Ian Hanna.